Hi everyone, it's Master P here from the Language of Composition, 3rd edition. We're here for another close reading passage video, and today we're going to take a look at an excerpt from Nature by Ralph Waldo Emerson. So let's get into it. All right. When we read closely, we know that we're reading actively, that there's a specific purpose and intention behind our reading and behind all of our annotations. So we're trying to get at those layers of meaning to make sure not only that we understand sort of the surface of the text, but that we also understand what the writer is trying to convey, what points he or she is making, what claims, what positions. And then we're also looking at how the writer is able to actually convey those positions and actually make those claims and develop a particular argument so that it's persuasive and effective given the rhetorical situation. So the tools that we need, we know we need our copy of the Language of Composition, 3rd edition. We know that we need our key passage handouts. Of course, highlighters are always helpful, but at the very least, we need a pen or a pencil, something with which we can write. So looking at our rhetorical situation, we know that we have those elements of the rhetorical triangle to consider, right? That classic rhetorical triangle, that whatever, no matter the text, when we consider the argument it puts forth, the text puts forth, we know that that text is shaped by the speaker. We know it's shaped by the subject matter, and we know that it's shaped by the audience. Surrounding all of that, what really makes it a situation, a rhetorical situation, is that larger context. So we're thinking about historical influences. We're thinking about issues that are going on at the time the text was written or created. And then we can also consider the specific occasion. What specifically gave rise to the creation of this particular text? So all of that's really important to consider before we get into looking at specific strategies. So let's take a look at what helped shape this piece of writing, this excerpt from Nature. The speaker is Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was from the northeast part of the United States, spent some time in New York, in Concord. So we know he was from that area of the United States. His background was heavily influenced, and his education was heavily influenced by the fact that he is from a long line of men who were in the ministry. And he himself actually was a minister for a short period of time before getting out and really going into the field of education. So he was an educator. He was a very well-known thinker and writer and a fairly prominent voice even within his own time period. So this particular piece was written soon after the founding of the Transcendental Club in 1836, which he founded. One of the other members you might recall or recognize would be Henry David Thoreau. At this time, the forces shaping America included population growth in the cities due to increased industrialization. That was we weren't in the throes of the Industrial Revolution at that point, but certainly there were more factory jobs. Things were starting to change in the American economy. And so in the Northeast, you also have the expansion of railways, canals, different forms of transportation that would change not only how goods are transported from here to there, but also the kinds of jobs people would have and the very nature of the natural landscape. So these are the things that are affecting Emerson's thinking at the time, and certainly others as well. So his audience for this piece would have been other members of this Transcendental Club, other intellects, thinkers, writers. It is a very challenging piece of writing, and so this was not intended to be read by the everyday person who may not have been as educated. The subject of this piece is humans' perception of beauty and really how that interacts with nature, how we perceive the natural world, how we react to the aesthetics of the natural world, and then the transient qualities of time, nature, and beauty. So, as always, our first step is to just read for understanding. And as I mentioned, this is a very difficult piece of writing. The language is antiquated, it's extremely philosophical, there are several allusions, which is not to say that it's impossible to understand, but it will take some time, and that's okay. So take a couple of moments or more, kind of slow it down, practice some of those strategies that you've used, your teacher may have taught you for reading really complex texts such as this. And then when you're done with that, we will go on to the next step. Okay. So now that we have a basic understanding of this passage, we want to make sure that we understand those overall features, those larger features. So we want to think about purpose, mood, tone, position, because when we break this piece apart, when we're looking at those strategies, we're breaking it apart so that we understand how those little pieces work to construct the whole, right? How do they influence the whole? So in terms of his purpose, and I'm going to refer to my notes here, which I took on my hard copy of this. I said that Emerson makes the case for nature as essential to man's health. I do think that his purpose was certainly to convey his own point of view about the importance of nature, the beauty of nature, and specifically, I think in this passage, to, like I said, make the case for nature as essential to man's health, that we need nature. The mood I described as thoughtful and reflective. His tone, his attitude toward nature is certainly admiring, if not awestruck. And his position is, again, kind of going back to what I said with purpose related, is that nature is best. Nature is medicine, right? He actually says that within the passage. And that our bodies were made to not only respond to it, but need it and get physical and sort of mental benefits from being in nature and appreciating it. So those are the larger pieces. Our next step would be to go back, and if we haven't already annotated for understanding, we can do that. Maybe go a second reading would be helpful with a piece like this, as dense as this one is. And then certainly to go back and look at those elements of style, look at those elements of argument, and then we can use our graphic organizer to collect our thoughts, which would then be a tool we can use to write our rhetorical analysis. So before we get to the graphic organizer, let's actually take a look at that passage. So I'm going to pause again so that I can get my copy and you can get your copy of the close reading passage, and then we'll annotate that together. All right. So I think I've got my copy prepared. Let me switch over to that. And here we are. So we're looking at a passage that is somewhat close to the beginning of this section. And so certain elements, certain points have been established, Emerson has established, but others he's really just starting to establish for us. So this paragraph starts off, the ancient Greeks called the word, and I literally can't speak Greek. However, there is a very helpful footnote placed there by the Bedford team. So this word means cosmos, right? Or beauty. Such is the constitution of all things, or such the plastic power of the human eye. Now, I want to draw your attention to that word plastic for a moment, because we are used to thinking about plastic as a material. But in this case, Emerson is actually using the form of the definition, the older form of the definition, meaning a material that is malleable, that can change or adapt, right? That the primary forms, and I want to draw your attention to this word primary as well. When I hear primary forms, I actually think primary colors, which speaks to that part of the definition of primary, meaning the basic or elemental. So I'm going to write that here, basic. And I'm writing on my screen vertically, so I apologize for my handwriting. So that those elemental forms as the sky, the mountain, the tree, the animal, and notice the lack of, well, a couple of things. One, you have the lack of any kind of conjunction, right? You have that technique of asyndeton. There's no and between these phrases. It's just the sky, the mountain. And the inclusion, the repetition of that word, the, which makes each of those elements an archetypal, really an archetypal element. I mean, he calls it a primary form. It's a part of our consciousness. So it's not just sky, mountains, that tree, this animal. It's the sky, the mountain, those archetypal images that all humans are familiar with, right? With what, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So they give us a delight in and for themselves. And this is one of his primary claims in the entire piece, and is certainly in this passage, that we get beauty. Humans gain a sense of delight, and he repeats that word a couple of times in this passage. And I think that word is important, that delight, speaking to an emotion that comes from our soul. And even, this might be a bit of a stretch, I don't know, the fact that you have the word light within delight. And he goes on later to talk about, he refers to light several times. So the laws of light, you can actually see the word just kind of popping out there. So I don't know. I don't know if that's too much of a stretch, but I think it's an interesting way of repeating the word light. All right. So this seems partly owing to the eye itself. Now, the word this referring back to the pleasure that arises from the outline, color, motion, grouping. And here he says the eye is the best of artists. So a short, simple sentence, a very clear claim, right? And he's stating it as a claim of fact. And really, he is personifying, sorry again for my writing, personifying that part of the human body and aligning the eye with this idea of an artist, something that can bring beauty to us. By the mutual action of its structure and the laws of light, perspective is produced. So he does recognize that there is a scientific reason, really a biological reason, for why we perceive nature the way we do. And so it's not just about how we feel, it's also how our bodies contribute to how we feel and how we are almost made, we are made to understand this beauty. Okay. Let's skip down here. And as the eye is the best composer, so light is the first of painters. So more personification to align the eye with the artist, composer, something that creates. The eye creates the beauty, and light contributes to that as well. And light provides various shades. There is no object so foul that intense light will not make beautiful. So we have some of the antithesis between foul and beautiful, light being in the middle there as the element that changes whatever was foul to something beautiful. Okay. Let's skip down to, this is a very long passage, so I don't want to, I'm not going to be able to go over all of it. But I do love how he lists the endless imitation. And so he references an endless imitation, and then it's a bit of form follows function, right? We have this list of images, seemingly endless. And so those are his examples of the individual forms which are agreeable to the eye. So he gives us very specific examples in a listed form so that we feel that sense of bounty of all that nature has to offer us and that we are able to witness. All right. And then he kind of pulls it back and he actually he adds some organization, right, to this piece. And so he says, for better consideration, right, to make things a little more clear, we may distribute the aspects of beauty in a threefold manner. Now that we provides a bit of an academic tone here, a little more formality. And so he begins to look at those aspects of beauty. Okay. Let me refer to my notes as well, because I do want to make sure we hit upon some of the most important. I mentioned before, we see the repetition of that word delight, right? Something that brings joy. He says to the body and mind. And these two things, body and mind, are put on equal terms. Nature affects both, and it's important to both. So it's important to our physical bodies and our minds, which have been cramped by noxious work or company. So, very negative attitude toward this idea of being inside and being confined. Nature is medicinal and restores their tone. So here we have the antidote. Nature is the antidote. The tradesman, the attorney, these two job titles really sort of representative of any job which keeps a person inside. So these are representations. Comes out of the din and craft of the street, so the noise, and sees the sky and the woods. So we have, again, that sense of, we have parallelism creating this compare and contrast moment. And one is clearly negative and one is clearly positive, and is a man again, right? So the imagery here is beautiful as well, that someone who is cramped and confined and berated by noise walks out into the sky and the woods and is man again. In their eternal calm, eternal having that religious undertone here, he finds himself. We are never tired so long as we can see far enough. And in this case, that we really seems to be speaking to the audience, right? All of mankind. He is included. We are all included. Okay. This next paragraph is just rife with figurative language. He uses metaphor, simile, certainly imagery to try to convey nature's loveliness, and almost in a poetic, using a lot of the same devices you would find in a poem on nature. So also in this moment, in this paragraph, it relies heavily on his own experiences, right? That personal point of view. So that's another shift here that we see. Again, compared to this first paragraph, which is a little more objective, then we get to a very personal paragraph. Okay, let's see what we have next. more imagery. Okay, a couple of rhetorical questions. Contemplating art, beauty, music. We step back again in this paragraph, sort of away from his references to himself, and we again become a little bit more objective. In that following paragraph, we're actually going to take a look at more closely this section here for our graphic organizer. So I won't say anything about that now. We'll come back to that. And then let's see what we have at the very end that I wanted to point out. Art cannot rival this pomp of purple and gold. Okay, so some personification, imagery, of course. And he does throughout, there is this connection that he develops between nature, beauty, and art. So that might be something to go back, right? And to look at how he connects those three very abstract concepts, how they are related, and what relationship he sees between them. So that's a good thing to take a look at. And then at the end, this really interesting paradox. Okay. He says, but this beauty of nature, which is seen and felt as beauty, is the least part, right? Skipping down here, if too eagerly hunted, become shows merely and mock us with their unreality. Go out of the house to see the moon, and it is mere tinsel. It will not please us. It will not please as when its light shines upon your necessary journey. So it's very interesting. The beauty that shimmers in the yellow afternoons of October, whoever could clutch it. We can't hold on to the beauty. As soon as you try to find it, right? It's this paradox of we know nature is beautiful, but as soon as you try to look at it, it loses some of its beauty. And this part here gets at the element of nature that is useful, that it's also nature appears its most beautiful when we need it the most. Go forth to find it and it is gone, right? So it's a mirage. And this idea of something being transient, elusive, right? That nature can't be contained. And therefore we should just appreciate the beauty when we're able to really feel it or experience it. Okay, so that is a lot of philosophical thought. Let's go back to our slides and let's take a look at our graphic organizer and how we might be able to use this. So with our graphic organizer, we can pull those quotations that we think are the most essential, put them into our own words because that helps us get at the meaning, identify the rhetorical strategy or the style element, and then, of course, thinking about the effect or function or both of that particular quotation and technique. So let's start with the quotation here. And I pulled that section. It's a little bit long, but I pulled that section where he writes, "The inhabitants of cities suppose that the country landscape is pleasant only half the year. I please myself with the graces of the winter scenery and believe that we are as much touched by the genial influences of summer. To the attentive eye, each moment of the year has its own beauty, and in the same field it beholds every hour a picture which was never seen before and which shall never be seen again." All right. So the way I paraphrased it, I said, people from the cities think the country is only nice half of the year. But I like nature in the winter as much as summer. Every moment in nature is different and can never be repeated. So that's how I put it into my own words. Yours may certainly be a little different, but we should essentially get at the same meaning. So I identified a counter argument. I identified Emerson's appeal to ethos, some word choice, some diction, and also something interesting with his syntax, this idea of form following function. So I said that he responds to the opinion held by citygoers by using his personal experience as a counterargument. He conjures a deified version of nature with words such as graces and touched by, and that the last sentence flits and mimics his point. So those are some of my notes on the effects or function, but that's not really a polished version. So if I want to write an essay or put this into paragraph form, I need to make sure I can really reference a lot of what I have here in this graphic organizer. So this is what I came up with. I said, Emerson responds to the opinion held by citygoers that the country is pleasant only half the year. So notice the difference here, what I did. So in my graphic organizer, I said, Emerson responds to the opinions held by citygoers, right? But in my more formal version, I've included their opinion. I've included that textual evidence and the quoted part that clarifies the opinion, right? By using his personal experience as a counterargument. He conjures a deified version of nature with words such as graces and touched by, before shifting to an objective point of view, which starts in the next sentence, to the attentive eye. So again, going back to my graphic organizer, some of this is the same, conjuring the deified version, but I did add, as I started to write, I thought about another element that I wanted to include about shifting to an objective point of view. So I said, from there, the phrases flit in and around commas. So I referenced the idea of flitting before, but I want to, again, be more specific. And this way I'm getting at the syntactical feature, the sentence structure, how he uses those short phrases and commas. Seemingly imitating Emerson's point contained within, and I want to clarify what that point is, that nature shifts its beauty in every moment, and these transient pictures, quote, shall never be seen again. So that gets at the effect of that sentence structure. Now I want to connect some of these elements back to the whole. And so I write, as a way of connecting back to the whole, as people spend increased time in urban areas and indoors, Emerson draws attention to the attention, I should probably fix that a little bit, but draws attention to the attention needed to appreciate nature and the immediacy of the demand. Okay, so Emerson draws attention to the, let's see, how would I fix that? Let's see if I can fix that. This is a good moment in revision. Right, Emerson draws attention to his position that humans should appreciate nature let's say as much as possible, or as often as possible. How about that? Okay, so let's see. Let's see if I like what I did. As people spend increased time in urban areas and indoors, Emerson draws attention to his position that humans should appreciate nature as often as possible. Okay, cool. All right, so I would continue to work on this. I would continue to revise to make my points. And hopefully I should be able to write a response to this prompt in a well-written essay, analyze the rhetorical strategies Emerson uses to develop his position on the relationship between humans and nature. So, all right, well, I want to thank you so much for your time, as always. We appreciate your hard work. We congratulate you on all of your efforts in your class, and we say, fare thee well, young scholars.